Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to go through all of the manga and comics that I read, the video games I played, and the shows and movies that I watched in the month of January. If you watched the vlog I did, some of this will be things that you saw mentioned there as well, and if you want to skip ahead to when I talk about things that I didn't mention in that vlog, I'll have the timestamp in the description bar down below. But there are a few additional things that I would like to add to some of what I read in that vlog or watched that maybe would still be of interest to you. And specifically, I want to start by talking about some of the Studio Ghibli that I got around to. So I did watch Nausicaa. I talked about Nausicaa in the vlog, and I'll get to that in just a sec. But first, I want to say that myself and some of my friends are big fans of Studio Ghibli, and I was talking to them about Studio Ghibli and asking if they would be interested in doing in-depth chats for the Studio Ghibli films. And they thought that sounded like a lot of fun. And so we are going to, hopefully at least once a month, maybe sometimes even twice a month, going to be doing discussion videos about those. First up, we have Nausicaa, and then we're going to do Kiki's Delivery Service, and then we're going to do Princess Mononoke as the third one. So if you're interested in seeing those, just be on the lookout. They will likely not show up under the videos tab, but rather the live tab, because usually I actually film them live, but then upload them on the channel later, and they'll still show up over there. But I'm so excited about this because there's just so much to dissect about some of those movies. Some of them are more lighthearted, some of them are really hard-hitting, and the differences between them and being able to have these in-depth discussions, I think, are going to better do them justice. But all of that said, first I'll start with Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind is the full title. I watched this. I haven't yet read the graphic novel as it's called at the beginning of the movie. It's not actually called a manga, but I do think that while I enjoyed so much about the movie, especially its themes, and I really liked the protagonist in this, it does feel as though there were some pieces missing. So the setup for the story is that you follow this young woman, Nausicaa, and she is the princess of the Valley of the Wind. And we're looking at a world where humans are essentially on the brink of extinction, as there were things that have occurred in the past that led to the landscape around them being almost uninhabitable. There are things that they have learned to do to adjust to their environment, but they can only live in certain places. But as is the nature of humans, it would seem it is inevitable that people are going to risk everything for the chance at conquering more land for their kingdom or for their own egos, or they're going to try to capture something that they feel will allow them to have a weapon that can counter some of what's going on, but in the long run that's not actually better because that's going to harm the environment, which might end up making it so there's even less land that people can live on. So there's a lot of themes involving balance and how much there is always going to be war, there is always going to be greed, but the way we need to live in harmony with the planet, with animals, with wildlife. And so those themes I thought were really powerful, and I thought they were executed really well. Nausicaa is somebody who is a fantastic main character in that she is always persevering. The story does a good job of not handing everything to her just because she's a good person. She has to really push through a lot of situations that would be so easy to give up. It would be so easy to decide, you know what, this is putting my life in danger. I don't want to take part in this. But she doesn't. She puts her life on the line for her people, for the planet, honestly. And I really liked that about her. I do think that she borders on being almost unflawed because she's just so good at everything. She's so resourceful, She's so cool too. But I loved her, especially because I mentioned this in my vlog as well. This is a story that I think is going to appeal to a lot of families, younger audiences, meaning there are children that are going to be watching this, and it's great to have characters that children can look up to, and I think Nausicaa is a great one. Where I do think there are some criticisms, and what I was talking about before, where there are some things that feels like there are holes. The history of the land, what exactly this particular being is that is essentially a weapon that another kingdom wants to use. Why do these other kingdoms have the things going on that they have going on? Those types of things, I think, feel like they're not as fleshed out. They didn't necessarily need to be in order for the story to still be enjoyable and satisfying, but I do think we could have done more there. And I am excited to eventually go back and read the graphic novels and have those gaps maybe filled in and see what was missing. But I chose to watch the film first because I didn't want to, the entire time I was watching the movie, to be like, wait, but they left this out, and how could they not have included this? So I figured this would be the better route, to actually watch the movie and then go back. I thought that would make the movie a little bit more enjoyable. Overall, I did enjoy it. That song though, the like la la la, the la 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 song, I was like, oh my gosh, it gets so easily stuck in your head. That might actually be my biggest criticism, is that song sticks with you. Oh my gosh. I'm kidding, but I enjoyed this. I liked it a lot. It was very different from a lot of the other Studio Ghibli that I have seen, but definitely not my favorite. And part of why Princess Mononoke is kind of ready to go as one of the next Studio Ghibli movies to watch, and that I'm going to be discussing with my friends, is because, and one of you pointed this out as well, that it really nicely does what Nausicaa was not able to completely do. It kind of takes that and it's like 2.0. So that's part of why I wanted to watch it relatively close to when I watched Nausicaa and when we have these discussions, because I think it'll be really interesting to compare and contrast the two. I also was able to see The Boy and the Heron. And Grave of the Fireflies I watched in January as well. Grave of the Fireflies is absolutely heartbreaking, devastating. It does not have the whimsy. It does not have the charm that you see in a lot of Studio Ghibli. It is just bleak. It is looking at the effects of war and how that trickles down to the innocent, specifically the most helpless of our populations, which would be our children. And you are looking at these two young children, one of whom is maybe 12 or so, and he is trying to look after his very, very young sister. And it's just devastating to see what they have to go through, their struggle for food, the way it seems like nobody wants to help anybody. Everybody is just trying to get by on their own. Nobody is thinking about community. Nobody is thinking about these young kids who are being left behind. And even if they do think of them, it's only for what they can gain from them. And there's so much symbolism in the movie. It's truly one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever seen, but I thought it was absolutely amazing. I think that if you are interested in watching this one, you might want to just kind of prepare yourself. I did do a whole in-depth video for this one where it's non-spoiler, but really highlights some of what I was talking about with the symbolism, with the color usage, and some of like the fireflies themselves. So if you are interested in seeing that, I'll have that video linked. But this, compared to The Boy and the Heron, was also really interesting to watch so close together, because the opening of these two movies is almost identical, where you have this catastrophic event and you have these young boys who are trying to handle this, and it does have this sort of backdrop of war. And so to see the animation style and how it's improved, I really, really enjoyed. I watched it and I'm like, wow, I feel like I just watched this. And so that was kind of interesting. It felt like it was a nod to itself, because the Grave of the Fireflies was made in the 80s, I believe, 1984, I want to say. And The Boy and the Heron is obviously brand new. So it was really cool to see how much improvement there has been over all of these decades. The Boy and the Heron was so weird. And it's one of those movies where I have theories about some of the themes. This is one where, while I was able to sort of give you a synopsis for Nausicaa, it's pretty hard to give you a synopsis for The Boy and the Heron. But the best I can do likely is to say there is a young boy whose mother has died, and so now he is living with his father and his stepmother, who it would seem was already sort of in the family, so he sort of knows her to some degree. And they're living in this house that has a lot of other individuals in it, and also this strange tower, and he seems very drawn to this strange tower and the heron that flies around all of these structures. And that sort of leads you into almost like an Alice in Wonderland, trippy, what the heck is even happening sort of adventure, you could say. And I think so much of it has to do with the denial of our character's mother having passed away, how she passed away, how that has affected him, and trying to come into his own, experiencing this level of devastation as a child and how you grow from being a boy into a man and how you are taking on these new responsibilities in your life, but also you just want somebody else to help you. And so there's so many things about The Boy and the Heron that I thought were really well done. There's also the signature, but also the environment sort of themes that I thought were really powerful. There's a whole section about pelicans. There's a lot of bird stuff in this as well. But there's a pelican part where was it Willem Dafoe that did the English one where I'm like, oh wow, he's giving like the performance of his life here. Oh my gosh, this is devastating. And also Robert Pattinson is the Heron, where I was like, wait, what? That's him? But anyway, that's nothing to do. Sorry for shouting at you. Anyway, it was so bizarre. It's a movie where I know there are entire videos dedicated to here's the symbolism and all of the things that you probably didn't really notice or understand about The Boy and the Heron. There's videos dissecting those things. That one scene with the pelican was so powerful and so sad and so tragic, but really highlights the way in which we really do want to take care of our planet and take care of the environment and animals. And so I think those elements were really well done. But it's weird. I mean, you can just go into the movie and be like, wow, this is a really weird movie. My husband loves odd, loves strange, loves unique. And he's like, where else can you go where there's going to be basically like an army of parakeet guards? And I'm like, that's true. I can't think of another story where that's the case. But it maybe leaned a little bit into extra weird for me. I think I like my stories to be a little bit less out there. But when I was talking about there being all these videos dissecting, I have avoided looking at those because when we do our discussions, we will eventually get around to discussing The Boy and the Heron. And I want all of us to be able to come to the table with our own interpretations. And then maybe later I'll look at some of those videos dissecting it, or maybe even I'll take a stab at dissecting what I think some of it meant. But that's the beauty of these sorts of stories and the beauty of art in general, is that even if there is a certain intention and even if some people get certain things out of a story, that especially with something so abstract in nature, so much of it is down to how you interpret it and what it evokes in you. And so I think The Boy and the Heron is special for that reason. The animation style is fantastic, but it was very weird. Now moving on to some manga. So I mentioned Yona of the Dawn volume 40 in that vlog. There's not too much I can say about this because it's so far along into the series. If you're interested in the series and you don't know much about it at all, I have a whole video talking about it as a non-spoiler, but giving you a big overview about it as a whole. In this particular volume, we're kind of in the middle of an arc. And something that we've seen throughout the story is we will start to look at other characters that Yona and gang basically are starting to develop as allies. And then there will be also new antagonists that come alongside these new ventures that they're on. And we're kind of in the middle of dissecting these new allies and antagonists, enemies. And so you're seeing their story a little bit more, which means we don't get to focus on the relationship building between our main cast as much, but rather we're looking more at developing these new side characters. And I would find this maybe a little bit of a bummer, except for that I do think that so far Yona has done a great job of bringing these characters back in these really pivotal moments. So if you ever like the trope, here comes the cavalry, that is definitely utilized really well. And it's because of build-up moments like what you see in this particular volume. Does mean we don't get to see, though, some of what are my favorite moments in the story, which is the building of friendship, the really like funny, silly nonsense between the various different characters. And we also don't get the resolution of this particular side character arc and side characters arc, you could say, because there's more than one. So we're kind of in the middle of it. I think the next volume hopefully is going to be really, really good. And I'm hoping we'll kind of tie this arc up and then we're in finally the final stretch. I don't know, but I enjoyed it. Not my favorite volume necessarily in the series, but it's tough when you're in the middle of something. Vinland Saga. Oh, Vinland Saga. I'm so happy to be rereading this. I still haven't quite decided how I'm going to go about reviewing this, but the thing I'm the most in favor of right now is that my husband and I will read and discuss per arc. So it's going to be a little bit more reading before we get our first one of those, if that's what we end up sticking to. It's tough because my husband doesn't have as much time to read as I do, but he loves the series, one of my favorites. So in the vlog, I had read through part of this bind up, and since then I have read through all of it, and oh my gosh, there's just so many things I've already tabbed, and there's a part that makes me so emotional. If you don't know anything about Vinland Saga, it is a revenge story where a young man named Thorfinn, honestly more like a boy, wants revenge because somebody he cared very much about was killed, and so now that is all his life revolves around. And that typical question you see in revenge stories of is it worth it is really looked at and examined so well in Vinland Saga, but also what it even means to have enemies and what it means to be a warrior, what it means to be strong. And whoops, sorry, I bumped the thing my mic was on. But there is a part that I know I'm already so sad when Thorfinn's father tells him, you have no enemies, no one has enemies. And as these people that sort of, this Viking culture, because it is historical fiction and Viking centered, there is just such this glamorized view, romanticized view of being a warrior. And Thorfinn's father, Thors, has experience, and he turned his back on that life because he knows it for what it really is, which is brutal, devastating, and it's not a beautiful thing. It's not a glorious thing. It is terrible. And so him knowing this, he does everything he can to keep his son and his family away from it, the people in his village, but they feel like, oh my gosh, wouldn't it be so amazing to be this strong warrior? And Thorfinn falls into that too. And there are just so many moments where his father, Thors, you can see this internal struggle where he doesn't want to have to walk that path again, but then he has to ask himself, do I walk this path to protect my child so that they don't have to ever walk this path? And just the direction that this first bind up goes in, it's so good. You end in such a tragic place, and I am sad that I have other things that I have to get around to because I just want to continue on with this story. It is absolutely amazing. Probably, I would say, the best revenge story I've ever read, that I've ever picked up. Highly would recommend to basically anyone. I know a lot of people who watch here. My main channel is primarily about fantasy books, and when they hear historical fiction, they're a little less interested, but truly, a lot of the things that we love about fantasy, a lot of the things that get explored in fantasy also get explored in this story. The really in-depth character exploration is phenomenal. There aren't too many other stories that really take the time like Vinland Saga does, so highly, highly recommend. I can't wait to be picking up more, but also I'm very sad. I feel like I'm not ready. I have another manga and also a comic that I picked up in January, but I want to really quick mention some video games. I finished my playthrough of Elden Ring, and second time around I found it to actually, and I'm not trying to be like super cool or anything like that, but it was a little extra easy because I had all this equipment. I played the same way. I didn't vary it or anything like that. So I just kind of breezed through it, but I gotta say, I mean, it was fun to just breeze through it. But I miss the challenge that was the first playthrough. And at some point, what has really become my favorite thing about Elden Ring is when somebody else is new to Elden Ring and then playing with them. I think it's more fun, I would argue, to play that way than to replay it alone. I don't know if everybody agrees with that, though. I think maybe if I tried a different play style, maybe I would have a little bit more fun as a replay, but regardless, it's a phenomenal game. It was so fun to also see just how much you actually do improve as you play that. Most people know From Software games are notorious for being extremely difficult. And the first time you get to certain bosses, you're like, this sucks, this is impossible. And you get really mad, you want to throw your controller. But then when you go back and replay it, you're like, oh, I used to think that was so hard, and it wasn't a big deal at all. So it really does actually, I feel like, build skill in you, and so I feel like I'm becoming that like obnoxious From Software fan. Regardless, I am really looking forward to Shadow of the Erd Tree just because I miss that challenge. I want that challenge back. This game continues though to be phenomenal. I mean, when I was playing it, there'd be so many times where I'm like, oh, this place really is so cool, or this place really is so beautiful, or ugh, I hate this place, it's so ugly and gross, and I hate Scarlet Rot. And so it was great to get to explore it, you forget how much there is. And then even after this playthrough, I was like, oh man, I didn't know that there was this quest available to do. I never did this quest. Or there were times where I would meet NPCs where I was like, I definitely did not talk to you the first time. And I thought I did basically everything the first time. So it just goes to show how enormous that game is. If you've never played Elden Ring, you have no idea what it's about. It's fine. You'll play it and you still won't know what it's about, more than likely. You probably have to watch lore videos. But that's another thing that was actually really fun about replaying it, is having since watched all these lore videos and I have a little bit more of a grasp on what's going on, then it made some of the boss fight, the little mini the dialogue they give before, I was actually like, I kind of know what they're talking about now. And I was more invested in the characters. Not the same way I am playing, you know, a Final Fantasy game or something. But there are those things there if you look. And also, I hear it now. I hear myself being that obnoxious From Software fan, but now I'm like, the item descriptions. There were times where I would read it and then there'd be a scene where I'm like, oh, that's actually sad now that I know the context. So there are pros and cons to replaying it. I'd say the biggest con being that it was actually kind of on the easy side and I got used to enjoying that challenge, but there were so many pros replaying it as well. My favorite thing still, though, just replaying it with other people. And my husband and I are trying to get our friend to start so that we can play with him. He's never played before. We're like, oh, that'd be so fun. So can't wait though for Shadow of the Erdtree. Another game that I started and have played a fair amount of is Tekken 8. So this was on my TBR for the year, or not TBR, but to be played for the year, because I have so much nostalgia for Tekken. Tekken Tag is still the best. I played Tekken 2, I played Tekken 3, I played Tekken Tag, I played Tekken 4. I played so many of the Tekkens. And then there was a period of time in my life where I didn't have the time really to play video games. So coming back to it, it's been a while. And I have to say, I do a little bit miss the simplicity of something like Tekken Tag, because I just miss in general these fighting games being about learning the combos, knowing when to block, knowing when to, okay, now I can use this really big attack because the other person's using an attack that takes a long time and I know that this attack is faster. I miss that. I feel like this new version of Tekken, you also see it in Injustice, they have these extravagant moves that you can trigger at certain moments, and I don't like that as much. If you like these extra things, then I think Tekken 8 will be so fun for you, but I do miss the just, oh, I've learned this combo, let's go. I know the move list better than you know the move list, that kind of thing, and I know your character more than you know your character, so I know how to block and fight against your character. I miss that. I will say, oh my gosh, has Tekken leaned into the camp to the extreme. It is pure nonsense at this point, and even the fighting itself, the things the characters say, is so ridiculous. So they have the regular arcade mode, and then you also have this story mode. And I had to play through all the story modes so I can play as this character. And there's another character that kind of sort of has her moves, but I'm like, no. And I haven't played this game since I was basically a kid, but I still know the moves. I was like, all right, let's go. And I was so excited. So it was just fun to be back with these characters. I do feel like they've kind of taken away some iconic moves from certain characters. They've taken away some iconic characters, which I understand, but I kind of miss those a little bit. But I will say the camp factor, like the bear fights, like when Kuma fights the panda, when they ask it to marry them with the fish, and the fact that you can whip a fish out and slap people with it is fantastic. So I really do love how absolutely off the walls ridiculous Tekken has become. I think it's fun in that way. I think it's an approachable game, and you can play online. Right now, I played online a little bit, and my same complaint about there being these extra moves you can do now, I kind of just want to fight people. So I'm enjoying it. I'm glad I got it. I'm glad I'm playing through it. I think I'm going to have the most fun, though, playing online with friends. I think that'll be my favorite thing to do with this. It's a lot of fun. Am I wrong? It feels like the move lists for the characters has been reduced, though. I feel like there used to be so many different combos you can learn. Still, a lot of fun. It's not going to be a new all-time favorite, but it's a good thing to just throw on when you want to spend 20 minutes derping around, basically. Now, back to manga and comics. So I actually ended up picking up a volume of Tokyo Ghoul in January. I was intending to pick up Tokyo Ghoul in February, so I started it a little bit early. I read volume 3, and I had been reading this and Ancient Magus' Bride. What I'm going to end up doing is, instead of reading them both at the same time, I'm just going to take the plunge, and I'm going to read all of Tokyo Ghoul. And I'm really excited about this because I feel like the story has gotten better and has gotten more interesting a few volumes in at this point. The setup for the story is pretty much like an alternate Japan where there are ghouls, and ghouls eat human flesh. Our main character, through some very interesting circumstances, finds that they are now half human, half ghoul, and they're trying to navigate this new life of theirs. And the ghouls, you're learning more about them and their powers and the way in which some of them are indeed bad and some of them are good, and they're just trying to live, and they're just trying to figure out how do we live among humans when we need to eat human flesh, but they don't want to have to eat humans. And so you're seeing that they're all painted bad though. And so there's the whole group of people dedicated to hunting them, and they're kind of the antagonists. But what I think is a great example of moral ambiguity is you're like, okay, but they have a very legitimate reason for not liking ghouls, because they think they're all they just are people that eat other people. So you get why they don't understand that there is humanity in a lot of ghouls. And the ghouls, understandably, that are good, hate this group of people because they're like, they just see us as all bad. So I'm like, okay, this is getting a lot more interesting, and I'm really curious to see how this is going to play out. I think volume 2 has been the best. This is volume 3. I think volume 3, it stretched out an event that didn't need to be stretched out quite so long, but that is part of why I want to just take the plunge now, is because I know a lot of manga, they do that at the beginning of the stories. Then once you get into it and it's kind of like, okay, it's now has a following, then it feels like they are able to navigate the pacing in a way that's more organic. So I'm going to see if I continue to feel that way as I continue on. But I am enjoying Tokyo Ghoul quite a bit, not as much as something like Vinland Saga, but it is a lot of fun, and I'm curious what's going to happen with the plot. Last I read some more of Saga, and so the last volume of Saga I read, I was like, no, because something sad happens, and there's a lot of great family dynamics in this story. You follow these two characters who, because their races they hate each other. The fact that these two characters have found love with one another and even had a child together has now made them like political, they're like politicized, and there are so many people that want to kill them because there's a lot riding on these two races continuing to hate each other. There's a lot riding on war, the profit from war, all these things. So the characters are constantly in danger, and they're on the run right from the start. And the family dynamics, not just with them, but their extended family, the people that help them along the way, the people that are hunting them. There's just so much that goes into it. There's a lot of PTSD that's explored. There's a lot to do with the violence of war and how unnecessary it can be. And I think it's done really, really well. But anyway, volume 2 ends in a place where you're like, no. And so you're seeing characters trying to grapple with their grief and things that have occurred in volume 2 at the end and in volume 3. So you're seeing that. And then you have these other characters that you've been introduced to, and you're like, yay, things are kind of looking up, but I know things can't look up for very long. And then of course they don't. And you're like, why can't this family just be nice and happy and find peace? There was a specific part. There's this creature known as lying cat, and anytime somebody lies, it says lying. And there's a part where this young girl who has been hurt, I don't want to go into depth as to how, but she starts to talk very negatively about herself as a result of the hurt others caused her. And when she starts to categorize herself a certain way, the cat says lying, and she like kind of smiles and snuggles with it, and that almost made me cry. If you know what I'm talking about and what this young girl has gone through, then you know why this moment was so meaningful and powerful, even though it's just this like random little, it's just one page of a couple of panels. But the expression on the character, Fiona Staples is amazing, this artist. But the expression on the character and just the way that immediately this cat-like creature stops that, it was a really powerful moment, even though it was just kind of an in-passing kind of moment. I also want to highlight the creativity. So Brian K. Vaughan, I love his dialogue. I think his characters are they always feel very real. But the creativity of this story, it really utilizes the sci fantasy subgenre to the extreme, but in a way where I'm like, what an imagination. The things they happen, like you'll just go to this planet and it'll be like, this is what it's like on this planet. And you get acclimated to it so quickly, it feels like, oh yeah, of course that's how it would be on this planet, even though you would never have thought about this thing yourself. And it's so interesting how quickly you can become accustomed to this level of creativity. And it really makes me, as somebody who loves to read fantasy, it kind of makes me envious, meaning I want more. I want more of this level of creativity in my stories. Anyway, we end off 3, not getting into spoilers here, but we just end it in a place where seems like even more people are starting to get involved in the characters' lives. Seems like we're going to really progress and see how it's not just this immediate, we're on the run type of story, but also the lasting effects. How are they, if they really are to try and have a peaceful life, what is that going to look like over the years? So I'm really curious to keep going with Saga. I've been really enjoying it. This last volume I read has really solidified that I think Saga is fantastic, but I'm a little nervous because I hear that it just gets more and more depressing. But anyway, that's it for my January wrap up. Let me know if you've picked any of these up. What are your thoughts on them? And also, if I have any reviews or anything, I'll have those linked in the description bar down below. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.